She had 2 cups of water, a lame horse, and a dead husband's broken promise, a deed to land that didn't exist. At 26, widow Eleanor Hayes was stranded 50 miles from a town that might just be a ghost story, dying slow under the Arizona sun. Then a stranger rode out of the heat and said 6 words that changed everything. "I knew your husband. I'm sorry." What he told her next shattered the last hope she had. But what she built from those broken pieces, that's the story you won't forget. Stay with me. Welcome to Cowboy Ember, where every story carries the warmth of a fire that never dies. Tales of the Old West filled with love, sacrifice, the fierce bond between mother and child, and the quiet compassion of strangers who become family. If these stories light something inside you, you're right where you belong. This story is proof that your worst wrong turn can lead you to your greatest life, not because the mistake was good, but because of what you choose to build from the ashes. If that truth moved you, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever found something beautiful in a place you never planned to be? Share this story with someone who needs a spark of hope today. And if you're new here, subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss a flame from the trail. Now, let's ride.
Eleanor Hayes had about 3 things to her name in this world: a broken promise from her dead husband, a trunk that was too heavy to haul, and a choice that was sure to be the death of her one way or another. That old Arizona sun had cooked the desert into a skillet, made her lame horse a death sentence, and turned all her careful plans to dust. At 26 years old, a widow for 3 months, she was stranded a good 50 miles from a town that might not even be there. She could feel her own body starting to give out, the whole world shrinking down to a single blazing patch of sky. But it wasn't the desert that scared her the most. It was knowing, deep down, that she'd been lost long before her horse ever took a bad step. If you want to find out what becomes of Eleanor, you'll have to stick with me to the end. And do me a favor. Hit that like button and tell me in the comments what town you're listening from. I surely do love to see how far these stories travel. That map was a liar. Or maybe Eleanor just wanted to believe it so bad she couldn't see the truth. She stood right in the middle of a whole lot of nothing that looked a thing like the neat lines and hopeful names her husband had traced with his finger 6 months ago. That was back when he was still breathing. Back when she still thought moving west was about heading towards something new, not just running from something old. The paper shook in her hands, but it wasn't from the wind. There was no wind, just a heat that pressed on you like a heavy hand. The shaking had started in her fingers an hour back and was now crawling its way up her arms. She knew what it was. She'd seen folks in Denver get taken by the heat. Her horse, a sweet mare she called Patience, who'd been her only friend since she left Colorado, stood a few yards off. Her head was hanging low, and she wouldn't put weight on her front left leg. The swelling had started yesterday. This morning, every step looked like pure misery. Eleanor had walked the last 5 miles, leading the poor animal, trying to make the water last and doing the hard math of survival in her head. The numbers were not on her side. She had left Tucson 4 days ago with a week's worth of supplies. The town was called Redemption. What a name, what a promise. It was supposed to be 6 days northwest, tucked into some hills where her husband had bought a piece of land, sight unseen, from a fella in a Denver saloon. Good water, the man swore, rich dirt, a place for a person to wash the slate clean. Thomas, bless his heart, believed him. Thomas believed everybody. Eleanor folded the map up real careful, the creases worn soft as cloth, and put it back in her jacket pocket. The jacket itself was just plain foolish in this heat, heavy wool buttoned all the way up. But she kept it on. Underneath was the only dress she owned that wasn't in tatters, and she had some stubborn idea that if she was going to die out here, she'd at least look like a lady. Her mother would have liked that. The sun was past its high point now, starting its long slide down to the west. She figured she had about 4 hours of light left. 4 hours to make up her mind on whether she was going to live or die. Behind her was Tucson. A 5-day walk, likely more without a horse and a proper water supply. Ahead of her, somewhere in the shimmering heat and endless brown hills, was redemption. Or maybe it wasn't. There was no way to know for sure. Eleanor took her canteen off her hip and gave it a little shake. Maybe 2 cups left. That would have to do for tonight if she was smart. It was nothing for tomorrow. "Well," she said out loud, her voice cracking in her parched throat, "this here's a real pickle." Patience lifted her head and gave Eleanor a look with those dark, trusting eyes. The mare was a gift from Thomas, from back when he still had money for gifts, before the coughing fits began. "She's gentle," he'd said, "and she's steady, just like you." Eleanor was never quite sure if he meant that as a compliment. She walked over to the horse and ran a hand down its hurt leg, feeling the heat coming off the swollen joint. It wasn't broken. She had checked that earlier, when she still had some hope left. But it was strained something awful. The mare needed rest, cool water, and good care. Eleanor couldn't give her any of those things. "I'm so sorry," Eleanor whispered, leaning her forehead against the horse's neck. Patience smelled like dust and sweat, and the faint scent of the lavender soap Eleanor had used to wash her mane in Tucson. That was back when she was still pretending this whole trip would turn out right. The horse nickered softly. It was a sound of pure trust that made Eleanor's throat feel tight. She stood up straight, blinking hard to keep the sting from her eyes. Crying was a luxury she just couldn't afford. Water was water, even if it came from sorrow. The land all around her was beautiful, in a hard sort of way. There were rolling hills covered in scrub brush and dotted with rock formations that glowed gold in the afternoon sun. A hawk was circling way up high, riding on warm air she couldn't feel down in this furnace. Far off in the distance, mountains rose up, all blue and hazy. They promised cooler air and water, promising things they likely couldn't deliver. Eleanor had learned a thing or two about promises. She pulled the map out one more time, smoothing it on her leg. According to the neat little notes Thomas had made in his hopeful handwriting, she ought to be close. The settlement was supposed to be near a big rock called Cathedral Rock, something you could see for miles. She didn't see any cathedral. She didn't see any rock that looked like anything special. Either she was in the wrong place entirely, redemption didn't exist, or the man who sold Thomas the land was the type to call any tall rock a cathedral if you wanted it to be. Eleanor was starting to get a pretty good idea which one it was. A noise cut through the quiet. It sounded like a branch snapping, or maybe a rock falling. Eleanor's head shot up, and her hand went right to the little pistol in her pocket. Thomas had taught her how to shoot, back when he was still strong enough to hold a rifle steady. She wasn't any good at it, but she knew which end the bullet came out of. She scanned the hills, her heart suddenly pounding in her ears. But there was nothing moving. That hawk kept on with its slow, easy circles up in the sky. Patience, the horse, shifted her weight and let out a soft groan of pain. Eleanor let out a breath she didn't know she was holding, feeling like a fool for it. Out in this wilderness, she was likely the most dangerous creature for miles around, unless you counted the sun. That sun was killing her by inches, and it didn't need any teeth or claws to get the job done. She had to get a move on. Just standing here, letting the daylight waste away, was not going to save her. But the question was, which way to go? Heading back to Tucson meant she was admitting she'd failed. It meant facing up to the fact that she had spent every last penny of their money, what little there was of Thomas's life insurance, to chase a dream to the middle of nowhere. It meant going back to a town where she didn't know a soul, where the best she could hope for was scrubbing other people's clothes, or worse. Pushing on toward redemption meant betting it all on a town that might not even be there, a town that might be full of hostile folks, or a town that might just be a figment of some mapmaker's imagination. Both choices felt like dying. One just seemed quicker than the other. Eleanor was so caught up in this impossible decision she nearly missed it. That second sound, a bit closer this time. It was not the snap of a twig, but something with a rhythm, something steady. Hoofbeats. She whirled around, her hand finding the cool metal of her pistol. Coming out of the north, maybe a quarter-mile off, a lone rider seemed to ripple into existence, right out of the heat haze, like a ghost. He wore a dark hat and dark clothes, and he sat a big bay horse with an ease that told her his animal was nothing like the half-starved nag she'd seen back in Tucson. Eleanor's mind raced, thinking of all the things that could happen. None of them were good. A woman all alone out here with a lame horse and a trunk full of her belongings. She might as well have been wearing a sign that said, "Come and get it." She slipped the pistol from her pocket and held it down by her side, not aiming it at the rider but not trying to hide it either. The rider saw her. She knew it from the way he straightened up in his saddle and slowed his horse to a walk. As he drew nearer, Eleanor could see more of him. He was a tall man with broad shoulders, maybe in his middle 30s. His face was weathered under the brim of his hat. She couldn't see any weapons on him, but that didn't mean a thing. He pulled up his horse about 20 feet away, and he raised a hand, palm open, in that old sign that meant he wasn't looking for trouble. They just looked at each other for a long moment, in the quiet. Eleanor tried her best to look like she was capable and not to be trifled with. She had a sinking feeling she just looked like what she was, bone-tired, desperate, and one wrong move away from being buzzard food. "Ma'am," the man finally said. His voice was a low rumble, worn rough by the sun and the wind. "You look like you're in a bit of a fix." "I am fine," Eleanor said, the words coming out before she could think. The lie tasted like dust in her mouth. His eyes, she could see them now. They were a startling light gray, set against skin darkened by the sun. His gaze moved from her face to her horse, to the trunk sitting in the dirt, and finally to the pistol she held in her hand. He did not smile, but the hard lines of his face seemed to soften just a little. "That horse of yours is not fine," he said, his voice quiet. "And if I'm not mistaken, you are about a day from dying of thirst out here." His plain talk knocked the fight right out of her. "Possibly less." He gave a slow nod, like she had just told him something he already knew. "Where are you headed?" "Redemption." A little something crossed his face then. Maybe it was surprise, or maybe he knew the name. "Redemption. You know of it?" "I know of it." He shifted his weight in the saddle, and the leather creaked. "You got family there?" "I have land there. Or I should say, my late husband does. I have the deed right here in my trunk." She saw him take that in, saw that little bit of softening around his eyes that folks always got when they found out she was a widow. She despised that look, despised the pity that came with it. "Ma'am, I do not know what you have been told about redemption, but—" He paused, as if he was thinking over his words. "How long have you been on the road?" 4 days from Tucson. Alone. She lifted her chin, a small act of defiance. "Does that matter?" "It matters. If you are asking me if I think you can make it to redemption on foot with no water and a lame horse." He said it like a simple fact, not trying to be mean, but not sugarcoating it either. "You cannot." Eleanor felt something break inside her chest. It was the last little piece of stubborn hope she had been clinging to. "I see. You got a name?" "Eleanor Hayes, Mrs. Hayes." He tipped the brim of his hat, a gesture so old-fashioned it took her by surprise. "My name is Caleb Morgan. I have a ranch about 3 miles south of here near Cottonwood Springs. It is not much to look at, but it has water and it has a roof. You are welcome to both, if you will have them." Every bit of caution Eleanor had learned back in Denver was screaming at her not to trust this man. Men who offered help to women stranded out in the middle of nowhere usually wanted something for their trouble. Out here, with not a soul to witness, no law to speak of, there was nothing but her useless pistol between her and whatever he decided to do. But the other option was to die all alone in this desert. "That is a very kind offer, Mr. Morgan," she said, choosing her words with care. "What would you be wanting in return?" His expression did not change, but she thought she saw a flicker of something in those pale eyes. Maybe it was respect, or maybe it was sadness. "Nothing, ma'am. My sister, she keeps the house. She will make sure you are fed and get some rest. Come tomorrow, if you still have your heart set on going to Redemption. I will take you there myself. I will show you exactly what you are walking into." "Why would you do that?" He looked away from her then, his gaze drifting out over the desert as the light began to fail. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. "Because no one ought to die alone out in this country. And because I knew your husband." Eleanor's breath hitched in her throat. "What?" "Thomas Hayes, from Denver. Bought a piece of land from a man named Carson in a saloon about 8 months back." Caleb's jaw grew tight. "Carson sold that very same plot of land to 3 other men. Your husband was not the only one he swindled." The words landed like a fist to her gut. She actually staggered and had to lock her knees to keep from falling over. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew it was all a lie." "I knew Carson was a liar and a cheat. I did not know about your husband until it was too late." He met her gaze again. "I am sorry. If I had known that Thomas was a married man, that he had someone who was depending on that land—" "He died," Eleanor said, her voice flat and empty. 3 months ago. Consumption. He thought the dry air out here would be good for him." She let out a laugh, a raw, ugly sound that scraped her throat. "He thought a lot of things were going to help." Caleb was quiet for a long time after that. "I am sorry," he said again, and this time it sounded like he truly meant it. Eleanor looked at her poor horse, at the trunk holding all she owned, and at the endless, empty desert stretching out in every direction. She thought about Thomas, about how full of hope he had always been, and his terrible judgment, and the way he died believing he was leaving her taken care of. She thought about the insurance money she had spent just to get to this godforsaken place, the friends she had cut ties with back in Denver, and the hard fact that she had nowhere else in the world to go. "Your offer," she said. "Was it a real one?" "Yes, ma'am." "And your sister? Does she know you are bringing me home?" "She will by the time we get there. Sarah is used to me bringing home strays." A faint smile touched his lips for a second. "She will have her say about it, mind you. But her heart is too big to ever turn a soul away." Eleanor put the pistol back in its holster. The choice, she understood now, was not really a choice at all. It was between living and dying, and she had come too far to just lay down and die now. "All right," she said, "I will accept your hospitality, but only for tonight. Tomorrow I want to see this land, even if it is worthless. I have to know." Caleb nodded and swung down from his horse in one smooth motion. Standing on the ground, he was even taller than she had thought and built solid. She could smell worked leather, horse, and something clean, like sagebrush. His hands, when he started to look at Patience's injured leg, were gentle and certain. "She will be all right," he said after a moment. "Just need some rest and a cold compress. I can lead her slow. You can ride Ranger here if you like. I can walk. It is 3 miles of rough country, and the heat is still on. You are already half gone from thirst." He straightened up, and there was no pity in his eyes now, just a plain and simple assessment of the facts. "Save your pride for a fight you can win, Mrs. Hayes." She wanted to argue with him, but her legs were shaking, and the very idea of walking 3 more miles made her want to sit down and cry. "Fine," she said, "but I'm keeping my pistol right where I can get to it. I would expect nothing less." Nothing. He helped her up onto his horse. His hands were steady and proper. Then he picked up her trunk like it was filled with feathers and tied it down behind his own saddle. Eleanor settled into the seat, feeling the big horse's warmth beneath her, and tried not to think about how very long it had been since she had been forced to trust another person. Caleb took Patience's reins and started walking south, leading both of the horses. Eleanor's mare followed along with a limp that made a deep ache settled in Eleanor's chest. They walked without a word for a good while. The sun got lower, painting the desert in shades of gold and fire. For all the fear and anger and the exhaustion that went clean to her bones, Eleanor caught herself noticing how pretty it was. The way the light hit the rocks, the sudden flash of a jackrabbit with its impossibly long ears bounding off through the brush. She heard the call of a bird she didn't know. Thomas would have loved this, she thought. He always talked about the West like it was the promised land, like all their troubles would just melt away once they got here. She never had the heart to tell him she'd stopped believing in any promised land a long time ago. "You said you knew Thomas," she finally said. "How?" Caleb didn't look back. He just kept on walking. "Met him in Tucson. He was asking about Carson, trying to figure out why the land office didn't have any deed on record. I told him what I knew, that Carson was a swindler, that the land was never his to sell. Your husband didn't take it too well. He thought you were lying. Most folks do when I tell them something they don't want to hear. It's easier than admitting you've been made a fool of." He paused for a second. Thomas seemed like a good man, honest, just too trusting for this part of the country. Eleanor just stared at the back of Caleb's head, at his worn-out hat and the sun-baked skin on his neck. "Did you offer to help him?" "I did. I told him he could work at my ranch, earn enough to buy some real land. He said he didn't need charity." Caleb's shoulders hitched up a bit. "I respected him for it, but I also knew how it would probably end, with him dying and leaving me stranded." The bitterness in her own voice was a surprise. She tried so hard not to be angry with Thomas, not to blame him for dying, for being so foolish, for dragging her clear across the country chasing a ghost. But that anger was there, just sitting and waiting. "I'm sorry," she said after a minute. "That was unkind." "It was honest," he said. "Nothing wrong with being honest." They came over the top of a small hill, and then Eleanor saw it. A thin ribbon of green cutting right through the endless brown. It was a sure sign of water. A cluster of trees followed what had to be a creek bed, their leaves rustling in a breeze she couldn't yet feel down in the stifling heat. Just past them stood a low mud-brick house with smoke curling up from a chimney. The word home flickered through her mind like a betrayal. It looked just like a home. "That there is Cottonwood Springs," Caleb said. "It is not much to look at, but the land is good. We have water all year round and decent pasture for the animals. I run about 200 head of cattle and a few horses. My sister, she keeps a vegetable garden. We get by just fine." "It is beautiful," Eleanor said, and she truly meant it. Caleb looked over his shoulder at her, his face holding an expression she could not quite decipher. "You say that now. Just wait until you have been here for a spell. The desert is a hard country. It does not forgive any mistakes." "I am not asking for its forgiveness," Eleanor replied softly. "I am just hoping it does not kill me just yet." She thought she saw the corner of his mouth twitch, almost a smile. "Fair enough." As they made their way down toward the ranch, Eleanor felt the air cool just a little. The trees offered a welcome shade, and the presence of the water seemed to change the very feel of the air. She could finally hear it, the gentle murmur of the creek, a sound so sweet it made her eyes burn. A woman came out of the house, wiping her hands on an apron. She looked younger than Eleanor had guessed, maybe 22 or 23, with dark hair in a long braid and the same light gray eyes as Caleb. She took in the whole scene at once, her brother walking, leading a lame horse, with a stranger sitting on his own horse, and she put her hands right on her hips. "Caleb Morgan, what in the world have you brought home this time?" "A guest, Sarah. This is Mrs. Eleanor Hayes. She needs some water and a place to rest." Sarah's look changed from annoyed to worried. She walked over quickly, her sharp eyes sizing up Eleanor. You look about half dead. Can you get down from that horse, or should I have Caleb lift you down? I can do it, Eleanor said. But when she tried to move her leg over the saddle, her muscles screamed out in pain. She would have tumbled right to the ground if Caleb had not been there to catch her. His hands were firm on her waist, holding her steady until her boots were flat on the ground. Easy now, he said. You have been riding hurt. I have been everything hurt, Eleanor mumbled, and was surprised to hear a short laugh from Sarah. Well, I like her already. Come on now, let's get you inside. Caleb, you see to that horse. I am already planning on it. Sarah looped her arm through Eleanor's, carrying more of her weight than Eleanor was willing to admit she needed, and guided her toward the house. The inside was plain, but it was spotless. The walls were whitewashed, the furniture was sturdy, and a fire was crackling in the fireplace. Even with the heat outside, the smell of food cooking made Eleanor's stomach twist with a sudden, fierce hunger. Sit down, Sarah ordered, pointing to a chair at the table. When was the last time you had a proper meal? Eleanor had to think for a moment. Yesterday, I think. Or maybe the day before? Good heavens. Sarah was already at the hearth, getting bowls and spooning something out from a pot over the fire. Caleb always finds the ones who are half dead, I swear. Last month, it was a gold prospector with a broken leg. Before him, it was a family with 3 children and no food. And now, we have you. I am so sorry to be a bother. Did I say you were a bother? Sarah placed a bowl of hot stew in front of Eleanor with a thick piece of bread and a cup of water. Eat this slowly. If you have gone that long without food, your stomach will need some time to get used to it again. Eleanor wanted to eat everything all at once, but she knew Sarah was right. She took her time, making herself take small bites. The food was so good it nearly brought tears to her eyes. It was a rich stew of beef and vegetables. The bread was still warm, and the water was cool and clean. Thank you, she whispered. Sarah sat across the table from her, her face softening. You are welcome. Now, while you are eating, you can tell me how you found yourself in the middle of this desert with a lame horse and enough luggage to last a year. So Eleanor told her. She spoke of Thomas and his big dreams, of the sickness that took his life, of the deed to a piece of land that never existed and the money that was all gone. She told her about the choice she had to make: stay in Denver and waste away slowly, or head west and meet her end quickly. She told the story plainly, without any extra drama, because she was just too worn out for any of that. After Eleanor told her story, Sarah sat thinking for a good long while. Well, she finally said, that sounds like a real bind. It was. And now you're here with nothing to your name, probably thinking you made a terrible choice. Eleanor looked right at her. I am not thinking it. I know I did. The real question is, what I am going to do now. A quick, fierce smile lit up Sarah's face, changing her completely. I knew I had a good feeling about you. Most folks would be weeping or making up stories. You are already planning your next move. Crying does not fix a single thing. No, but it can sure make you feel better sometimes. Sarah got up and poured more water for Eleanor. This is what we are going to do. You will get some rest tonight. In the morning, Caleb is going to take you to see that land of yours, and you can figure out if it is worth anything. Then she gave a little shrug. After that, we will sort out what happens next. Together, if you would like, but you do not even know who I am. I know you were brave enough to get this far. I know you kept going when most people would have quit. That is all I need to know. Sarah's face grew serious. Listen, Mrs. Hayes. Eleanor, please call me Eleanor. Eleanor, this country will swallow a person whole if they try to take it on by themselves. Caleb and I had to learn that lesson the hard way. You do not have to be by yourself any longer. Not unless you want to be. Eleanor felt a knot deep in her chest finally come loose, a tight coil of fear, pride, and pure weariness. Her eyes started to sting. She placed her spoon down very gently and pressed her hands flat on the table, trying to keep herself from falling apart. I do not know how to not be by myself anymore, she said in a whisper. Sarah reached over the table and put her hand on top of Eleanor's. Her hand was warm and rough from work, and strong. You will figure it out, she said. We all have to, sooner or later, too. The door swung open, and Caleb walked in, carrying the scent of horses and dry earth with him. He glanced at Eleanor, then at his sister, and at their hands held together, and a look passed over his face. Maybe it was understanding, or maybe he just recognized the situation. The horses are taken care of, he said in a low voice. Your mare will be fine in a few days after she rests. Thank you, Eleanor said. Eleanor, for everything you have done. I do not, her voice broke. I do not know how I can ever repay you. Caleb took his hat off and hung it on a peg near the door. His eyes were kind when he looked at her. There is no need for repayment, Mrs. Hayes. You just get your strength back. The rest of it, well, we will handle it as it comes. And as she stood in that cozy kitchen, taking in the smell of baking bread, hot stew, and a little bit of hope, Eleanor knew that for the first time in many months, maybe even years, she thought that things just might turn out all right. Eleanor woke up to the sound of water trickling over rocks and the aroma of coffee so powerful it felt like a hand on her shoulder, pulling her from sleep. For a second, she had no idea where she was. The bed felt too comfortable, the room was too cool. The morning light filtering through the window was too soft. Then it all came flooding back. The desert, her horse going lame, Caleb Morgan showing up in the heat, almost like she had wished him into existence out of sheer desperation. She sat up in bed, her body reminding her of yesterday's hardships. Her shoulders were sore from the sun, her legs ached from so much walking, and her throat was still raw from a thirst that had lasted far too long. But she was alive. She had food in her belly and had rested. That simple truth felt like a miracle she was not quite ready to believe in. The room Sarah gave her was small, but it was spotless, with clean white walls and a window that overlooked the creek. Someone had placed a pitcher of water and a wash basin on the dresser, next to a fresh towel and a bar of soap that smelled of lavender. Eleanor poured some water into the basin and washed her face and hands, feeling the layers of dust and worry wash away with every splash. When she stepped out of the bedroom, she saw Sarah by the stove and Caleb sitting at the table. They moved about their morning with the comfortable ease of two people who knew each other's routines by heart. They both looked up as she came in, and Eleanor suddenly felt awkward in her rumpled dress and with her hair uncombed. "Good morning," Sarah said with a smile. "Coffee, please." Caleb got up and pulled a chair out for her. He then poured coffee from an old pot into a tin cup. Eleanor held the cup in both hands and breathed in the steam, letting the warmth seep deep into her bones. "Did you sleep all right?" Sarah asked as she put a plate of eggs and cornbread down for her. "Better than I have in a very long time," Eleanor confessed. "Thank you for the room, and for the meal." She made a small gesture that included everything. "For all of this." "You are very welcome." Sarah took a seat across from her with her own cup of coffee. "Caleb was just mentioning he could take you out to see your land this morning, if you feel up to it." Eleanor looked over at Caleb, and he held her gaze. In the clear morning light, she could see the fine lines around his eyes and the flecks of gray in his dark hair at his temples. He's lived a hard life, she thought to herself, a life that had been etched into his face just as the desert was carved into the land. "I would appreciate that very much," she told him. "I have to see what I am up against." "I cannot say you are going to like what you see," Caleb warned her. "Are you not prepared for that?" "I have been prepared for bad news since my husband first started coughing up blood. I can manage it." A little something changed in his look. Maybe it was respect. He gave a single nod. "All right then. We can go as soon as you are ready." Eleanor ate her breakfast quickly. A good night's sleep had made her hungry, and she knew that whatever was coming, she would face it better with a full stomach. After she ate, she excused herself to comb her hair and put on the same jacket she'd worn the day before, even though the heat was already starting to climb. Sarah saw her. "You do not have to put that on, you know. It is going to be over 90 degrees by noon." I know, but it is the only proper thing I own. Eleanor tried to smooth the old wool. You can call it pride or just being foolish, but I want to see my husband's land looking like a lady. There is nothing foolish about having dignity, Sarah said softly. But there are some extra clothes in that trunk in your room if you decide you need them. We are about the same size. The simple offer of kindness took Eleanor by surprise. I could not possibly. You could, and you will if it comes to it. That is just what neighbors do for each other out here. Sarah stood up and started to gather the breakfast plates. Now go on. Caleb is a patient man, but the day is not going to wait for you. Outside, the morning air was already warm, but the blistering heat had not set in yet. Caleb had 2 horses saddled and ready, his own big bay named Ranger, and a smaller chestnut mare that had a white star right on her forehead. Patient was standing in a nearby corral, her hurt leg wrapped in a fresh bandage, munching happily on some hay. This one is Cinnamon, Caleb said, pointing to the chestnut mare. She is a gentle horse and has steady feet. You will be safe with her. Eleanor walked up to the mare cautiously, letting the horse get her scent before she gently petted her neck. Hello there, beautiful. Caleb gave her a hand up into the saddle. His touch was professional and careful. Then he swung himself onto Ranger with a natural grace that showed he had spent his life on horseback. They started off at a slow walk, heading north along the creek and through the cottonwood trees. For a long time, neither of them said a word. Eleanor found herself relaxing into the steady motion of the horse, watching the sunlight dance through the tree leaves and listening to the sound of the water. It was a kind of peace she had almost forgotten could exist. How long have you lived out here? She finally asked. 8 years. I came out with my folks and Sarah when I was 27. This whole area was empty back then, just waiting for someone to come along and see its potential. His voice was straightforward, but she could hear something else in it. Maybe it was pride or even love. We built the house that first year. We lost our parents during the second winter to influenza. It has been just Sarah and me ever since. I am so sorry to hear that. I am too. He was silent for a bit. They were good folks. They deserved a better end than dying in a cold house in the middle of nowhere. Eleanor knew the heavy feeling behind his words. It was the guilt you feel when you make it through and others do not. My husband always said that death does not care what you deserve. It just shows up when it is ready. Your husband was right about that. Still, the hidden criticism of Thomas bothered her. Even though she had thought much worse things about him herself, he was not a bad man, just a very hopeful one. Out here, those 2 things can be one and the same. Caleb looked over at her. I do not mean to speak badly of him, but being hopeful without a plan is what gets people killed. Your husband bought land from a man he just met in a saloon without ever checking if it was real, without asking anyone about it, without doing any of the things a smart man would work out. That is not being hopeful. That is being careless. Eleanor felt a blush of heat on her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. He was dying. He just wanted to believe that we could still have a future together. And now he is gone, and you are the one left to deal with what he believed. Caleb's voice was not mean, just steady and firm. I am not trying to be unkind, Mrs. Hayes. I am just trying to make sure you know the difference between hoping and planning. Out here, one of those things will keep you alive. The other will get you put in the ground. They rode the rest of the way in a heavy silence. Eleanor wanted to argue with him, to defend Thomas and his dreams, but the words would not come. She knew Caleb was right, and they both knew it. The cottonwood trees started to get sparse as they climbed higher into the hills. The land opened up into a wide expanse of rock, brush, and a sky that went on forever. Eleanor could see for miles in every direction, and the enormous size of it all made her feel tiny and vulnerable. How much farther? She asked. About another mile. You will know it when you see it. They reached the top of a ridge, and Caleb pulled his horse to a stop. Eleanor came up next to him and looked down at what her husband had died believing was their future. It was a skinny valley, probably 50 acres, closed in by rock walls on 3 sides. The ground was hard, dry earth with little more than creosote bushes scattered about. She could not see any water or any trees or any sign that anything had ever grown there, or ever could. "This is it." Her voice was flat and empty. "This is it. This is the land that Carson sold to your husband and to 3 other folks." Caleb pointed to the northern edge. "You see those wooden stakes over there? That is where someone tried to build a house last year. They dug about 20 feet of a foundation before they figured out there was nothing but solid rock under the dirt. They gave up and left." Eleanor just stared at the forgotten stakes, at the hole someone had dug before finally giving up. She thought of Thomas back in that saloon in Denver, believing the slick words of a stranger, seeing a grand future where there was only emptiness. "There is no water." "No, the closest place with water you can count on is back at Cottonwood Springs. You would have to haul every single drop 3 miles over this rough land." Caleb's voice was softer now, seeing the look on her face. "I am truly sorry, Mrs. Hayes, but this piece of land is not worth the paper your deed is written on." Eleanor slowly got off her horse and walked down into the valley, her boots making a crunching sound on the dry ground. She knelt down and scooped up a handful of dirt, letting it run through her fingers. It was light and sandy, the kind of dirt that would just blow away with the first good wind. Behind her, she could hear Caleb get off his horse and follow her down. "How much did he pay for this place?" Caleb asked in a quiet voice. $300. It was everything we had saved. Eleanor stood up and dusted the dirt from her hands. "He told me it was an investment in our future. We would build a house, start a small farm, maybe open a little store in the nearby settlement. He had it all worked out. It all." "What settlement?" Eleanor let out a short, bitter laugh. "Exactly." She walked over to the abandoned foundation and stood there looking down into the hole that someone else had dug while chasing the very same lie. She wondered just how many people Carson had cheated, how many dreams had shriveled up and died in this worthless soil. "I feel like I should be feeling something," she said. "Anger or sadness or something, but I am just so tired." Caleb came and stood beside her. He did not touch her or offer any empty words of comfort. He just stood there, solid and real. "You've been running on nothing for a very long time. Feeling things is a luxury, and you have not had many of those lately." "No." "So, what are you going to do?" Eleanor looked up at him. "What choices do I have?" "You could try to sell it. You might get $50 for it if you can find someone who does not know this area. You could try to farm it anyway, but that would probably kill you in about 6 months. You could just walk away from it, let it go back to whoever really owns it." He paused for a moment. "Or you could stay with us at Cottonwood Springs for a while and figure out what to do next. Your sister made me a similar offer last night. Sarah has good instincts when it comes to people." Caleb's pale eyes were looking right at her. "Look, Mrs. Hayes, I know you do not know us. And I know it is not easy to accept help from strangers, especially after what you have been through. Let down quite like you have. But in these parts, folks leaning on each other is not some fancy idea. It is how we survive. And you have already shown you know how to survive. Have I really? Well, you are still on your feet, are you not? After everything you have weathered, you are still here, still putting up a fight. That has got to count for something." Eleanor glanced back at Barren Valley, at a dream that was never more than smoke. Her mind drifted to Thomas and his hopeful ways, to the life insurance money she had sunk into this place. She thought about being 26 years old and having to start all over with less than dirt to her name. "What would I even do?" she asked him. "In Cottonwood Springs, I mean. I am no ranch hand. I cannot throw a rope or shoe a horse, none of the things that are worth a dime out here. Can you read?" The question caught her off guard. "Of course I can. Can you write? Do your numbers?" "Yes. I was a teacher in Denver before I got married." A slow look of satisfaction spread across Caleb's face. "Well, then, you are just what Cottonwood Springs is needing. We have got about 30 families scattered in a day's ride and maybe 40 children who have never set foot in a schoolroom. The town council has been trying for 2 years to find a teacher, but nobody wants to come way out here." Eleanor felt a funny little flutter in her chest. "Are you offering me a job?" "I am just telling you the work is there if you want it. The pay is not much, maybe $30 a month plus your room and board, but it would be yours, earned honest, and it would give you some time to sort out your next move." "Room and board where?" "Sarah and I have been talking about putting up a schoolhouse on the edge of our land. It would not be anything grand, just a single room with a wood stove and a sleeping loft up top for the teacher. With the neighbors helping, we could have it built in a month." He shifted his weight. "You would have your own place, your own independence, and you would be doing something that truly matters." Eleanor tried to wrap her mind around his words. A job, a home, a purpose. All the things she figured were gone for good, just offered to her on a morning ride through the scrubland. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do all this for me?" He stayed quiet for a long spell, just gazing out at the empty land. When he finally spoke, his voice came out lower with a bit of gravel in it. "5 years ago, I was set to marry a woman named Catherine. We were going to build a life right here. She passed from pneumonia 3 weeks before we were supposed to say our vows." He took a breath. "Folks kept trying to help me, and I kept pushing them away. I was too proud, too mad, too caught up in what was gone to see what was still there. Sarah finally lit into me, said that turning down help wasn't a sign of strength, it was a sign of foolishness. She told me those folks weren't taking pity on me. They were trying to honor Catherine by making sure I made it through losing her." He turned his eyes on Eleanor then. "I can't say if all that's true, but I know I only survived because I finally let people in. And I know if I can do the same for somebody else, especially for someone who's got the backbone and good sense to use it, then maybe it all means something. Maybe it counts." Eleanor felt the sting of tears in her eyes and blinked them back with force. "I don't want your charity." "Good, because I'm not offering any. I'm offering you a job for fair pay and a community if you're willing to be a part of it. The rest is your call." She had to turn away from the intensity in his gaze, looking back at the valley one last time. This land was supposed to be her future, what Thomas had given her. His provision, his promise. Now it was just empty dirt under an empty sky, worth nothing to nobody. But maybe that was okay. Maybe what mattered wasn't what Thomas had left her, but what she decided to do now. "I'll need to look at the deed," she said at last. "I want to be sure it's truly worthless before I walk away from it." "Fair enough. We can ride by the land office in town and have them verify it. And I'll need to know more about this teaching job. What ages, what subjects, what the families will expect. We can set up a meeting with the town council, and I will need some time to think. I need to be sure this is what I want, not just the only thing offered." Caleb nodded. "That's fair, too. Though for what it's worth, Mrs. Hayes, sometimes the only thing offered turns out to be exactly what we need." They rode back to the ranch without a word, but the silence felt different this time. It wasn't tight with tension, but full of thought. Eleanor's mind was already turning over possibilities, weighing the risks, and laying out the next steps, just like she used to do before Thomas got sick and took her future with him. When they got back to the house, Sarah was waiting on the porch with a pitcher of lemonade and bread still warm from the oven. She took one long look at Eleanor's face, and she knew. Bad news. Worthless, Eleanor confirmed. Absolutely worthless. "Well, shoot," Sarah said, handing her a glass. "I reckon Caleb told you about the teaching position, though. He did mention it." Eleanor took a sip of the lemonade. It was tart and sweet and cold. "And I am thinking on it." A knowing smile spread across Sarah's face. "Good, because I already told the council you were coming to dinner tonight to talk it over." "You did what?" "Now don't you give me that look. You're a teacher who needs work. We're a town that needs a teacher. It's just practical, not pushy." "It is absolutely pushy," Eleanor said, but she couldn't stop a smile from finding her lips. "What if I say no? Then you say no and we keep on looking. But you won't." Sarah settled into a wicker chair and propped her feet up on the porch rail. "You've got that look folks get when they start seeing a path forward. I've seen it a time or two. Eleanor wanted to argue, but she knew Sarah was right. For the first time since Thomas died, maybe for the first time since he'd taken ill, she could see beyond the trouble right in front of her to something that looked a little like a future. It was a small and shaky thing that might fall to pieces, but it was there. "Tell me about the town," she said, "and give it to me straight. I've had enough pretty lies to last me a lifetime." So Sarah told her all about Cottonwood Springs, a little settlement of 30 families scattered across 10 square miles of hard country. She talked about the ranchers and the miners, and one stubborn fella who kept a store open even though he hardly made a dime. She spoke about the absence of any real law, with the nearest sheriff a good 40 miles away, and how disagreements were settled by a council vote or sometimes with a round of fists. She told her about the children who grew up half wild, all of them bright and curious, but completely unschooled, hungry for more than just getting by. "It's not an easy life," Sarah said. "Nothing out here is, but it's real and it's ours, and we're trying to build something that will last. A teacher would be a real part of that, not just somebody passing through who'll take off when things get tough, but someone who'll put down roots, someone who decides to stay." "I don't know if I'm that person," Eleanor admitted. "I just don't know if I can be." "We don't know either, but we're willing to find out if you are." That evening, Eleanor put on the only good dress she had left, a dark blue cotton mended with care, and she let Sarah fix her hair. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a woman who almost resembled the one she'd been back in Denver. Composed, capable, professional. Not the half-starved creature who had stumbled onto this ranch just 2 days ago. "You look lovely," Sarah said. "Now you remember these are good people, but they're going to test you. They need to know you mean business. I understand." The town council met in the back room of the general store, a place that smelled of pipe tobacco, old leather, and that certain musty scent of rooms where men gather to make big decisions. There were 5 of them. 2 ranchers, the shopkeeper, a mining engineer, and a woman named Margaret Cole, who ran the biggest cattle operation in the territory with her 2 grown sons. Margaret was the one who spoke up first. She was maybe 50, with gray hair pulled back tight and eyes that didn't miss a single thing. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm told you're a teacher." "I was in Denver before I married." "And why did you stop?" "My husband did not believe it was proper for a married woman to have a job." Margaret's mouth twitched just a bit. "Then your husband was a fool. What did you teach?" "The primary grades. Reading, writing, arithmetic, and a little history and geography. Can you handle older children? We have some that are nearly grown who've never seen the inside of a schoolhouse." Eleanor thought of the boys in Denver who had come to her class angry and defiant. Too old to want to learn, but still too young to have real futures. "I can teach any child who wants to learn, and I can get through to most of the ones who don't." One of the ranchers, a tough old fella named Dutch with a face like dried leather, leaned in. "What about keeping them in line?" he asked. "These ain't city children. They're wild and used to running free. I don't hold with taking a switch to a child, if that is what you mean, but I do believe every action has a consequence. If a student acts up, they lose their privileges. If it keeps on, I'll have a talk with their folks. I have never met a child I could not reach given enough time. And what if their folks don't agree with your ways? Then we talk it out. I am not here to tell anyone how to run their home. But inside my schoolhouse, I decide how these children get an education." She held Dutch's gaze without flinching. "If that is a problem for you, we ought to settle it right now, before we all waste our breath." The room fell silent for a heartbeat. Then Margaret let out a short, sharp laugh. "I like this one. She's got some grit." "The question is, will she stick around?" said the man who ran the store. His name was Wilson, and he had the tired eyes of a man who had seen too much disappointment. "We have had 2 teachers come out to this place in the last 3 years. Not one of them stayed longer than a month. Said it was too lonely, too much hard work, and nothing like they pictured." Eleanor thought about that worthless piece of land, about Thomas gone forever in Denver, about her choice. She could go back to a city that held nothing for her, or stay in a place where she might find something. I will not make a promise I can't keep and say I will be here forever. She said, I do not know what tomorrow brings no more than you do, but I will promise you this. If you give me this job, I will put my whole heart into it for as long as I am here. I will be here every single day to teach every child who walks through that door. And I will work with this town to build something that lasts. I will not leave unless you tell me to go, or until I have given you plenty of time to find someone new. That is all a person can ask, Margaret said. She looked around at the other council members. I make a motion to offer Mrs. Hayes the job. $30 a month, plus a room and meals once the schoolhouse is finished. Until it is, she can board with Caleb and Sarah Morgan, and the town will pay them for her stay. I second that, Dutch grunted. Wilson looked straight at Eleanor. You sure you know what you're getting into? This is not like teaching in some fancy city school. There is no one in charge but you, no extra help, and nobody to call on if things go sideways. It is just you and what you can make of it. I understand, and I accept the position. They sealed the deal with a handshake, one by one, their hands all rough from hard work. When Eleanor walked out of that store an hour later, her head full of talk about books and supplies and how to build a school, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders for the first time in months. Sarah was waiting for her with the wagon. Well, I am your new teacher. I knew you would be. Sarah grabbed her in a quick, strong hug. Welcome to Cottonwood Springs, Eleanor Hayes. You just made the best choice of your life. Eleanor was not so sure about that. Not just yet. But as they rode back toward the ranch while the sun went down, past the cottonwood trees and the little creek toward the small house that was starting to feel like home, she thought that maybe, just maybe, Sarah was right. Maybe this was the place she was meant to find all along. Not some make-believe town that was never real, but a real place, with real people who had a real need for what she could give. Maybe this was what a new beginning truly looked like. That schoolhouse went up faster than a tumbleweed in a windstorm. Not even a week after the meeting, wagons full of lumber rolled in from Tucson, along with crates of nails, glass for the windows, and a big cast-iron stove that took 4 grown men to haul down. Caleb put the word out for work parties, and that Saturday morning, it seemed like half the territory was there with hammers and saws, full of the get-it-done spirit you find in folks who know how to build things to last. Eleanor just stood to the side on that first day, feeling about as useful as a screen door on a submarine, while the men put up the walls and the women laid out food and water. She had offered to lend a hand, but was politely told to stay clear and let them get on with it. Sarah just laughed at her restlessness. They are doing this for you, Sarah told her, passing her a ladle of cool water to surround. They told her, let them. Besides, you'll have plenty of work once that building's finished. So Eleanor made herself useful in small ways. She fetched tools, kept the water bucket full, and watched the children who had come with their parents, running wild down by the cottonwoods. There were more of them than she had expected, from little toddlers all the way up to a lanky boy who looked to be about 16. They all eyed her with a mix of curiosity and suspicion, and she eyed them right back, already figuring out who was going to be a handful. By sundown, the frame was up and the roof was mostly on. A fella named Dutch Hayes, no relation, though the shared name had startled Eleanor, stood back and looked over their work with a satisfied grin. Another week, maybe 2, and she'll be ready, he announced. Stove will need a proper chimney, and we'll have to build you some furniture, Mrs. Hayes, desks and such. I can help with that, Eleanor said quickly. I may not know much about carpentry, but I can sure follow directions. Dutch grinned wide. A city teacher who's not afraid of getting her hands dirty. Margaret was right about you. That second Saturday, Eleanor did help. She held boards steady while they were nailed in place and learned the special words of construction. Words like joists and studs and headers. Her hands got blistered and her back ached something fierce, but there was a deep satisfaction in watching that building take shape, knowing she had been a part of creating it. Caleb worked right alongside everyone else, stripped down to his shirt sleeves in the heat, his face streaked with sawdust. Eleanor found her eyes drifting his way when she thought no one would notice. She watched the easy way he moved, the quiet authority he had when directing the work, and the patience he showed whenever someone made a mistake. He caught her looking once and raised an eyebrow. She felt a heat rise in her face that had nothing to do with the sun. That evening, after everyone had gone home, it was just Eleanor, Sarah, and Caleb sitting on the porch in the cooling air, and Sarah brought up the one thing Eleanor had been trying not to think about. "You'll need to decide what to do with Thomas's land," Sarah said. "Even if it's worthless, that deed still exists. It might complicate things down the road if you don't get it settled." Eleanor had already been to the land office in town the week before. The clerk, a nervous man with ink-stained fingers, had confirmed what Caleb had already told her. The deed was a fake. The land had never been Carson's to sell in the first place. The real owner was some mining company out in California that had no idea a soul was squatting on their property. "I could try to find the other people Carson cheated," Eleanor said. "See if we could get together and take some kind of legal action." "You could," Caleb said from where he sat, whittling a piece of wood. "And you'd probably spend 2 years and every dollar you earn fighting a battle you're not going to win. Or," he continued, "you could let it go, cut your losses, and move forward." "That feels like letting him win," she said, her voice low. "Carson's already won. He's got your money and 4 other people's money. He's probably halfway to San Francisco by now, selling the same lies to somebody else." Caleb's knife moved steady, shaving off thin curls of wood. "The question isn't whether he wins. The question is whether you're going to let what he did keep running your life." Eleanor knew he was right, but the sheer injustice of it all still burned inside her. $300, every penny Thomas had saved, everything they had planned their future on was gone. All of it went to a man who lied as easily as he breathed. "I just hate that he gets away with it," she said quietly. "I do too. But hating it won't change it." Caleb finally looked up from his work. "You want my advice? Take that deed, put it in a box somewhere, and forget you ever saw it. You've got better things to spend your energy on now." The schoolhouse was finished 3 weeks after they had started. Eleanor spent 2 whole days just cleaning and organizing before the first day of classes. The building smelled of fresh pine and new paint. The desks, built by Dutch and 2 other ranchers, were solid and level. Margaret had donated some old slates and chalk from a failed mining venture, and the territorial government had sent a box of primers and arithmetic books that were a bit outdated, but they would do just fine. Eleanor stood in that empty room the night before school was to start, and felt a mix of pure excitement and sheer terror. She had taught before, but that was years ago in a proper school, with other teachers and a set curriculum. This was different. This was all hers. Everything that worked or failed would be because of the choices she made. "You ready?" Sarah asked, standing in the doorway. "No, but I don't think waiting is going to make me any more ready. That's the spirit." Sarah came inside and looked around the room. "It's a good space, Eleanor. You should be proud. I didn't build it. You gave them a reason to build it. That counts for something." That night, Eleanor barely slept a wink. She went over her lesson plans again and again, imagining all the different things that could happen. She planned for children who might be eager to learn, or stubborn, or somewhere in between. When the sun finally started to rise, she dressed carefully in her blue cotton dress, pinned her hair up neatly, and walked the 1/4 mile from the ranch house to the schoolhouse with her heart hammering against her ribs. Her first student arrived at 7:30. A little girl about 8 years old with blonde braids and a very serious look on her face. She stood in the doorway clutching a slate and just stared at Eleanor. "Good morning," Eleanor said, giving her a warm smile. "I'm Mrs. Hayes. What's your name?" "Anna." The girl's voice was barely a whisper. "Anna Kirkland. My ma said I had to come to school." "Well, I'm very glad you're here, Anna. Why don't you pick a desk, whichever one you like?" By 8 o'clock, 12 children had arrived, ranging from Anna's age all the way up to that 16-year-old boy Eleanor had seen at the building day. His name was James, and he slouched against the back wall with his arms crossed, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Eleanor took attendance, learned their names, and then stood at the front of the room. She looked at all the faces watching her, their expressions ranging from curious to bored to downright angry. "My name is Mrs. Hayes," she began, "and I'm going to be your teacher. Some of you have been to school before, and some of you haven't. Some of you are excited to be here, and some of you would rather be just about anywhere else. That's all right. I understand that. But while you're in this room, I expect 3 things from you: respect for yourselves, respect for each other, and effort. If you can give me those 3 things, we are going to get along just fine." "What if we can't?" James asked from the back of the room. Several of the younger children turned to look at him with wide eyes. Eleanor met his challenging gaze without flinching. "Then we will talk about why, and we will find a solution together. But I want to be very clear. This is a place for learning, not for fighting or for testing my limits. You want to challenge me, James? Do it with questions, do it with ideas, do it with work that proves you are smarter than I think you are. That is the kind of challenge I welcome." Something flickered in the boy's eyes. Maybe it was surprise, or maybe he was sizing her up. He did not answer, but he did straighten his posture just a little, and Eleanor counted that as a small victory. She spent that first morning figuring out where each student stood. She had to see who could read, who knew their numbers, who had been taught some at home, and who had never even held a book before. The difference between them was staggering. Anna could read simple words, but struggled with anything longer than 4 letters. A boy named Thomas, a name that still made Eleanor's chest tighten, could do complicated math in his head, but could not write his own name. And James, despite his hostile attitude, had clearly been well educated at some point and was reading at a level far beyond any of the others. By lunchtime, Eleanor's head was spinning from the challenge of teaching so many different levels all at once, but she was also filled with a new energy. These children were hungry for knowledge in a way her students back in Denver had never been. Even the ones who tried to act tough could not quite hide their interest. That pattern continued through the first week and into the second. More students started showing up as word got around. By the end of the month, Eleanor had 23 children, with ages ranging from 6 to 17. She organized them into 3 groups based on their ability instead of their age, which scandalized some of the parents until they saw how much their children were finally learning. Was still a handful. He was smart as a whip, but had an anger inside him that was always bubbling up. He was constantly pushing the rules, trying Eleanor's patience with sharp words, and by making a fuss on purpose. She had him stay after class one Friday, about a month after school started. They sat across from each other at her desk like 2 ranchers about to argue over a property line. "What are you doing here, James?" she asked him straight out. "My mama makes me. That is why you walk through the door. I am asking why you do not walk right back out. You could leave this room any time you pleased, and I could not do a thing to stop you. So why are you still sitting there?" He looked away, his jaw set hard. "Maybe I enjoy watching you try to teach us something." "No. You enjoy learning, but you are mad about something fierce, and you are taking it out on all of us because that is easier than facing what is truly eating at you." Eleanor leaned forward a little. "I am not going to pry into your life. That is your own business, but I am going to tell you this. You are one of the smartest pupils I have ever had, and you are throwing it all away on being stubborn. If you want to be angry, then go on and be angry. But be angry while you are getting smarter, while you are building a future, while you are becoming a man who counts for something." James just stared, his face turning red. For a second, she thought he was going to blow up, stomp out of the school, and never come back. But then, his shoulders just seemed to collapse. "My pa passed on last year," he said, his voice low. "A mining collapse. Left me, my ma, and my 3 sisters with nothing. I ought to be out there working, bringing in some money. Instead, I am in here fooling with arithmetic like a little kid." Eleanor felt a pain in her own chest. "How old are you, James?" 16. "Old enough to be a man. You are old enough to make a man's choices. That does not mean you are a man just yet." She took a breath, thinking carefully about her next words. What did your father do before he worked in the mines? He was an engineer. He designed systems for processing ore. Made real good money, too, before he had to stop. Before he took that job in the mine that took his life. James just nodded, keeping his eyes on the floor. James, look at me. Eleanor waited until he lifted his head. The best way to show respect for your father is not to follow his footsteps down into a dark mine. It is to finish the work he started, to get the education he thought was so important, to become the engineer he was. You have maybe 2 years of schooling left before you are ready for an apprenticeship or even a university. Just 2 years. Can you give that to yourself? We could never afford a university. Then we will figure it out. There are scholarships, work programs, something. But you have to do the work right here first. You have to prove you're worth the trouble. Her voice got a little softer. I know you are angry, and I know you are scared. But turning that fear into meanness is not going to help you or anybody else. Turn it into fuel. You study like your life is on the line. Because out here, it just might be. James was quiet for a long, long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was scratchy. Why do you even care? You do not know me from Adam. Because I am a teacher. And because a long time ago, somebody cared enough about me to tell me some hard truths I needed to hear. I am just paying the favor forward. After they had that talk, James was a different person. He was still a challenge and he still had his opinions. But the anger was gone. He dove into his schoolwork with a fire that was almost scary to watch. Eleanor had to start ordering more advanced books from Tucson just to keep him busy. The other children were coming along too, each in their own way. Anna just bloomed once she figured out that reading could take her to faraway places. Thomas found out he had a real knack for numbers, and Eleanor started teaching him about surveying and engineering. A pair of twin girls, Mary and Martha, had voices like angels, so Eleanor began every day with a song. The work was bone-tiring, and it never ended, and sometimes it made her want to pull her hair out, but Eleanor loved it with a passion that took her by surprise. This was her calling. Not being Thomas Hayes's wife, not chasing after some dream town in the desert, but teaching children who needed her. She had been in Cottonwood Springs for 3 months when Caleb finally mentioned the quiet space that had grown between them. It was late in the evening, and they were sitting by the creek after Sarah had turned in for the night. This had become their little routine. Just the two of them in the cool dark, talking about the day or not talking at all, just sharing a comfortable quiet had settled between them. Eleanor had quit asking herself why she felt so right sitting there with him. She had stopped trying to put a label on whatever this was they had. You are happy here, Caleb said. It was a statement, not a question. I am, more than I ever figured I would be. You are a natural at teaching. The children talk about you like you hung the moon and stars. Eleanor felt a small smile tug at her lips. They are just being sweet. I am only giving them what any child deserves. A little attention, some respect, and expecting the best from them. Well, that is more than most of these kids have ever known. Caleb was silent for a beat. Are you fixin' to stay? The question caught her sideways. I gave my word I would stay through the school year at least. Why do you ask? Because folks are starting to set down roots counting on you being here. Families who are about to move on are staying put because their children are finally learning something. That is a heavy load to carry, I know. And I am not planning on going anywhere, not unless... She trailed off. Unless what? Eleanor looked out at the water, watching the moonlight skip across the top. Unless I have to. Unless something happens that makes it impossible to stay. Like what? I do not know. Maybe the town council decides I am not cut out for it. Maybe the money for the school dries up. Maybe... She paused. Maybe I meet somebody, and he wants to take me away from here. Caleb went as still as a stone beside her. Are you planning on meeting somebody? Not planning on it, no. But it is something that could happen. Could it? Eleanor turned to look right at him. In the pale moonlight, She could see his face plain as day, the strong set of his jaw, the careful blank look he was trying to hold on to. Her heart started to beat a little harder. "I do not know," she said, speaking the honest truth. "I was not looking for a thing when I came to this place. I was just trying to get by." But things change. People change. They do. Caleb turned his whole body to face her. "Eleanor, I have got something to say, and I need you to just listen. Do not interrupt, and do not make up your mind about anything just yet. Can you do that for me?" She just nodded, afraid her voice would crack. "I have not looked twice at a woman since Catherine passed on. Did not think I could, did not think I wanted to. But watching you these last few months the way you have, put yourself back together, the way you have poured your heart into teaching, the way you are becoming a part of this town, I find myself thinking on things I figured were buried and gone for good." He took a breath. "I am not asking you for a thing. You have got enough on your plate without taking on my feelings. But I wanted you to know because being truthful matters, and because I get the feeling maybe you have got a little something stirring, too, even if you are not ready to put a name to it." Eleanor's throat felt tight. "Caleb, you do not have to say anything else. To be honest, I would rather you did not. Not right now. Just think on it. And you should know that whether you feel the same way or not a thing changes between us unless you want it to. You have got a home here, a job, a place in this community. And that does not depend on anything except you wanting to stay." He stood up then, and Eleanor got to her feet with him, her thoughts racing a mile a minute. She wanted to say something to let him know she heard the weight of what he had offered. But the words just would not come. So instead she just reached out and took his hand, gave it one firm squeeze, and felt him squeeze right back. They walked back to the house without another word. And when they said their good nights at her bedroom door, Eleanor felt like the ground beneath her had shifted. Not in a bad way, not broken, but changed in a way she could not quite explain. That night she lay awake thinking about Caleb's words, about how careful he was to offer up his heart without asking for anything back. It was so different from Thomas, who had chased after her with a smile and a sweet word until she finally said yes, mostly because she was just too worn out to say no anymore. Caleb was giving her room to breathe, time to think, the freedom to walk away. The only question was, what did she want? She had been a widow for 6 months. A proper woman would mourn for a year, maybe longer. But Thomas had been slipping away for so long before he finally passed that Eleanor had already cried most of her tears while he was still breathing. By the time he was gone, she felt more relief than anything. Relief that he was not in pain anymore. Relief that she could stop pretending that everything was going to be all right. Did that make her a bad person? Maybe it did. But it was the God's honest truth. And the truth was, when she thought about Caleb Morgan, about how steady he was, his quiet kindness, the way he had offered her a hand up without expecting her to bow down in return, her heart did a little flip she had not felt in years. But she was not ready. Not just yet. There was still too much up in the air, too much she had to prove to herself about the woman she could be on her own 2 feet. So she would wait. She would teach her children and build her life and let whatever was growing between her and Caleb take its own sweet time, with no pushing or prodding. She would give herself time to become Eleanor Hayes, the teacher. Eleanor Hayes, a part of the town. Eleanor Hayes, the woman who had been broken down and built herself back up. And then, maybe then, she would let herself be something more. The next morning at the breakfast table, Caleb acted like nothing had changed, and Eleanor was happy to follow his lead. But as she was leaving for the schoolhouse, he caught her eye and gave her a small smile, and she smiled right back. That little look felt like a promise that neither one of them was quite ready to say out loud. The weeks kept rolling into December, bringing nights with a real bite to them and a fine dusting of snow that got the children all excited. Suddenly, her lessons about weather felt a whole lot more real. Eleanor ordered supplies for a Christmas program, and she and Sarah started planning something simple but nice for the families. James came up to her one afternoon after all the other children had gone home. Mrs. Hayes, I have been thinking about what you said about engineering school. I found a program out in California. They take on apprentices, and you learn while you work. It would not cost me a dime, just my own sweat and time. Eleanor's heart swelled up. James, that sounds just perfect. When does it start? Next fall. But I am going to need letters of recommendation and proof I have done all the schoolwork to get in. He looked down at his boots, a little nervous. Would you help me with that? Of course I will. We will get those applications filled out together. We will get you ready. She paused for a moment. James, I am so proud of you. Your father would be too. His eyes got a little shiny and he looked away fast. Thank you, ma'am. After he left, Eleanor sat at her desk and just let herself feel the true weight of what it meant to be a teacher out here. She was not just cramming heads with numbers and letters. She was cracking open doors for them, showing them lives they could have, giving them the tools to build a future their folks could never have dreamed of. It was the kind of thing that scared you spitless and made your heart swell with pride all at the same time. And she knew it was exactly what she was put on this earth to do. That evening, she walked back to the ranch and found Caleb fixing a fence line down by the corral. He looked up as she got closer, and something in the way she was smiling made him put down his tools. A good day? He asked. The best. James is going to apply to that engineering school. Anna read a whole chapter book by herself, and little Thomas figured out the board feet they needed to build a new barn for the Kirkland family. She was smiling so wide her cheeks started to ache. Caleb, they are learning. They are really learning. And it matters. Of course it matters. You matter. He said it so simply, like he was just stating a fact, like the sun coming up in the morning. Eleanor looked at him, standing there in the last light of day, so solid and real and patient. And she felt something inside her chest just click into place. It was not love, not yet. But it was the promise of it, the warm spot where it could grow. Thank you, she said, for bringing me here, for giving me this chance. She waved her hand, trying to take it all in. For everything. You gave yourself the chance, Eleanor. I just pointed you down the right road. Still, she said, thank you. They stood there for a minute as the sun dipped low, painting the whole desert in shades of orange and pink. Eleanor thought about the map that was a lie, the patch of dirt that was worthless, and the husband who had died chasing a fairy tale. Not a single thing had turned out the way she had planned. But standing right there in the middle of a real life in Cottonwood Springs with a job she loved, in a town that needed her, with a man who saw her for who she was and wanted her anyway. Eleanor realized that maybe the whole point was not about how your plans turned out. Maybe the point was what you decided to build from the pieces when all your plans fell apart. It was that time of year. By the middle of December, a hard frost settled on the ground each morning, which meant Eleanor had to show up at the schoolhouse before sunrise. She needed to get the stove good and hot to chase the chill from the room before any of the children got there. Her hands got all cracked and sore from the biting cold and from scrubbing the writing slates clean every day. She started keeping a small tin of healing salve in her desk drawer, right next to the chalk and the well-loved copy of McGuffey's Reader she used for the little ones. The Christmas program was scheduled for the last Friday before the holiday break. Eleanor poured every bit of her energy into getting it ready, working so hard it even took Sarah by surprise. They practiced songs and poems, made simple decorations out of pine boughs and spare ribbon, and rehearsed a little play about the first Christmas. Eleanor had changed the story some, taking out the more church-focused parts after Margaret Cole gently reminded her that not every family out in the territory held the same beliefs. Just make it about neighbors and being good to one another, Margaret had told her then. That's what really counts out here. So Eleanor rewrote the play. It became a story about travelers helping each other survive a tough winter, and the children took to their parts with a kind of excitement that made you forget they had no real stage training. James played the part of a traveling salesman with such a straight face that he had the grown-ups laughing during practice. And Anna, who was scared to death of speaking in front of people at the start of the school term, had turned into a fine narrator. Her voice was clear and strong, and you could hear her all the way in the back of the room. The morning of the show, Eleanor woke up long before the sun with her stomach tied in knots. This was bigger than just a school play. This was her proving ground, a test to see if she had truly been accepted into this community, to see if these families really trusted her with their children's learning and their futures. If this program was a flop, if the parents were let down or took offense, everything she had worked so hard to build could just fall apart. "You're going to worry a hole right through yourself," Sarah said at breakfast, watching Eleanor just moving her food around on her plate. "It is going to be just wonderful." "You cannot know that for sure." "Oh, but I do. I have seen you with those kids for months now. Eleanor, they would walk through a prairie fire for you, and their folks see that plain as day." Caleb had been quiet all through the meal, but he finally chimed in. "Sarah is right. You have earned their trust. The only thing left is for you to trust yourself." Eleanor looked at him across the kitchen table and saw a certain calm in his eyes. It was a confidence she did not feel herself, but maybe she could borrow some of it just for the day. She gave a little nod and made herself eat, knowing she would need all her strength for the long day ahead. By 6 o'clock that evening, the little schoolhouse was packed tighter than a can of sardines. Families had come from as far as 15 miles out. Every single desk had been shoved up against the walls to make room for a stage area, and folks were standing shoulder to shoulder in the chilly room. You could see their breath puffing out in little clouds that swirled in the lantern light. Eleanor did a quick count and saw at least 60 people, which was more than she ever figured would come, and certainly more than the small building was ever meant to hold. Margaret Cole took it upon herself to get the older folks and the mothers with little babies seated, her calm and steady presence making order out of what could have been a real mess. Dutch and his wife came in carrying a basket of cookies that made the whole room smell like cinnamon and sweet molasses. Even old Wilson, the storekeeper who never had a good word for anything, made an appearance with his arms loaded down with candy sticks to hand out after the show. Eleanor stood up at the front of the room, her hands trembling just a bit as she welcomed everybody and told them what to expect for the evening. The children were all lined up behind a curtain Sarah had made from some old blankets. Eleanor could hear them whispering nervously back there, and she could feel their mix of excitement and stage fright coming right through the cloth. "Thank you all so much for coming out tonight," she started, and was relieved when her voice came out strong and even. "These children have put in a lot of hard work, and I'm just so proud of everything they have done. But before we get started, I would like to say a little something about why we are all here." She took a breath, trying to get her thoughts in order. This was important. This was her chance to say what teaching really meant in a place like Cottonwood Springs. "When I first arrived in this territory 6 months ago, I was lost. And I do not just mean I could not find my way on a map, though that was true too. I mean I was lost in all the ways a person can be. I had lost my husband, my home, and I had lost my way in the world. I came out here chasing after a dream that turned out to be nothing but a lie, and for a while I thought that meant I was a failure." Eleanor glanced around the room at all the faces looking back at her, faces that were weathered by the sun, patient, and full of kindness. "But this town, all of you, you showed me something I had forgotten. You showed me that dreams do not have to be perfect to be worth going after. That sometimes the best lives are the ones we build side by side with our neighbors, not the ones we dream up all alone. Your children have taught me that. And tonight, I hope they can show you what they have learned. Not just their letters and their numbers, but what it means to work as a team, to lift each other up, and to make something truly beautiful out of whatever you happen to have." The room was quiet as a church for a second, and then old Dutch started clapping. The sound spread like wildfire until the whole schoolhouse was ringing with it. Eleanor felt her eyes start to well up with tears, but she blinked them back fast. There would be no crying. Not just yet. The program kicked off with the littlest children singing a sweet, simple song about snow falling. Their voices were high and clear, and every now and again a little bit out of tune. Anna recited the story for the play with perfect pronunciation. She only had one little scare when she forgot a line, but James whispered it to her from his spot just off the stage. The scene with the traveling salesman got some real, honest-to-goodness laughs, and the last part of the play, with all the children holding hands in a big circle and reciting a poem Eleanor had written about community and grit, left more than a few of the mothers dabbing at their eyes. After the show was over, the families stayed to visit and talk while the children gobbled up Wilson's candy and soaked up all the praise being sent their way. Eleanor made her way through the crowd, accepting kind words and answering questions about what they would be learning in the spring. Everywhere she turned, she felt a real warmth, a sense of belonging. Margaret found her standing near the stove. "That was mighty fine, Mrs. Hayes. Better than fine. You have given these folks something to be proud of. The children did all the real work. Those children had a teacher who believed in them. That is not something to be taken lightly." Margaret's sharp eyes seemed to look right through Eleanor. "You are fixin' to stay on, I hope, past this school year." Eleanor thought about the question Caleb had asked her down by the creek, the one about putting down roots and trust and carrying the weight of what other people expect from you. "I am planning to stay for as long as I am needed and wanted. Is that a good enough answer?" "For right now," Margaret said, and a small smile softened her words. "But sooner or later, you will have to make up your mind if this place is home, or if it is just a place you are passing through. This territory is no place for folks who always keep one foot ready to leave." After every last person had gone and the schoolhouse was put back in order, Eleanor walked back to the ranch underneath a sky that was just blazing with stars. The temperature had dropped well below freezing, and her breath came out in white clouds, but she felt a warmth spreading from the inside out. The program had been a big success, but it was more than that. It was proof that she belonged here, that the decision she had made to stay had been the right one. She found Caleb sitting on the porch, even with the cold, wrapped up in a thick blanket. He got to his feet when he saw her walking up. "So, how did it go?" "It was perfect. Well, almost perfect. Anna forgot one of her lines and Thomas accidentally knocked over a prop, but other than that..." Eleanor laughed, and the sound just bubbled up out of pure happiness. "It was wonderful, Caleb. They were all just wonderful." "Well, of course they were. They had you for a teacher." Eleanor climbed the steps to the porch and stood close enough to him to feel the warmth coming off his blanket. Without even really thinking about it, she leaned her head against his shoulder. After just a moment, she felt his arm come around and hold her steady. "Margaret asked me if I was planning to stay," Eleanor said in a quiet voice. "Past this year." "And what did you tell her?" "That I am staying as long as I am needed and wanted." She paused for a beat. "But she said, sooner or later I will have to decide if this is home or just a stopping point." Caleb did not say anything for a long moment, his arm just solid and sure around her shoulders. "Well, what do you think it is?" Eleanor looked out across the desert, at the dark shapes of the cottonwood trees against the star-dusted sky, at the little schoolhouse standing small but strong in the distance. She thought about the children who put their trust in her, and the families who had welcomed her in. The folks who had welcomed her, the life she was putting together from dust. She spoke slowly, as if weighing each word. "I reckon I've been so scared of making the wrong choice again that I have just been avoiding making any choices at all. But standing out here tonight, after all that has happened, I think maybe I already made my choice. I just was not brave enough to admit it to myself yet. And now, well, now I am ready." She tilted her head back to look at him. "This is home, Caleb. It is not just some stopping point. It is home." The tightness in his face seemed to loosen. "Good. That is real good to hear." They just stood there in the chilly air, sharing the blanket and their own warmth. And Eleanor felt the very last wall she had built around her heart just turn to sand. She had been clinging to her sadness and her fear and her pride like a suit of armor. But she did not need that armor anymore. Not in this place. Not with this man. "Caleb, about what you said a few months back, about having feelings for me, you do not have to answer to that. I truly meant it when I said I would not push you. I know you did, but I want to answer." Eleanor took a deep breath, mustering up her courage. "When Thomas passed, I thought I was finished with all of this. Being married, having a partner, trusting another soul with my future. He had made so many wrong turns, dragged me so far and wide chasing his ambitions, and I went along because that is what a wife was supposed to do. I made a promise to myself I would never do that again. Never let another person have that much control over my life. That is understandable. But what you are offering is not that, is it? You are not asking me to follow you anywhere or to give up what I have built here. You are just..." She searched for the right way to say it. "You are just offering to walk alongside me. To be a part of my life without trying to take it over. That is all I want, Eleanor. Whatever you are willing to give, be it a little or a lot." Eleanor felt the wetness of tears on her cheeks and did not even try to wipe them away. "I am not ready for anything too serious. Not just yet. The proper time for mourning is not over, and people will surely talk if... Then we will wait. I have gotten pretty good at waiting. But I want you to know that I feel something too. Something that feels real and good and frankly a little terrifying. And when I'm ready, when a respectable amount of time has passed and I am sure in my own heart what I want, I think it just might be you." Caleb's hand gently came up to her face, his thumb softly brushing the tears away. "That is more than enough for right now. More than I ever hoped to hear." They finally went inside, chased in by the deepening cold, and Eleanor slept that night with a lightness in her spirit she had not felt since long before Thomas had gotten sick. Something had been decided, put to rest, even if all the particulars were still fuzzy. She had a home, she had a purpose, and she had the promise of something more when she was finally ready to reach out for it. Christmas came and went in a quiet, peaceful way. Sarah cooked up a big fancy meal that the three of them ate together at the kitchen table, and Caleb gave Eleanor a beautiful journal bound in leather, with her initials pressed right on the cover. "For your lesson plans," he said, "or for whatever else you feel like writing down." Eleanor ran her fingers across the smooth cover and felt a lump form in her throat. "It is too much. It is exactly enough. You are always jotting things down on little scraps of paper. I figured you could use something more proper." She gave him a knitted scarf she had been working on in the evenings, made from wool Sarah had helped her buy in town. It was a little bit crooked and probably not as warm as it ought to be, but Caleb wrapped it around his neck the second she gave it to him and kept it on for the rest of the day. The new year blew in with a cold snap that froze the creek solid and kept the children home from school for 3 days. Eleanor put the time to good use, getting her curriculum in order and working on harder material for James, and extra exercises for the little ones who were having a tough time with their reading. When school was back in session, she saw some of the children had changed. Thomas seemed to have shot up over the holiday, and his voice cracked when he answered a question. Anna had a new confidence about her, reading out loud without even being asked. And one morning, James came in with a letter from that engineering program out in California, his hands shaking just a little as he showed it to Eleanor. "They want to have an interview with me," he said, his voice a mix of pure excitement and raw fear. "In March, they are sending a man to Tucson to meet with folks they might take on as apprentices." Eleanor's heart just about soared. "James, that is wonderful news. We will get you ready. We will practice the questions they might ask. We will make certain you are ready." "What if I am not good enough?" "You are more than good enough, but we will make certain you are prepared enough too." There is a big difference. They worked together every day after school for the next few weeks. Eleanor coached him on how to answer questions and helped him put together a collection of all his best work. She wrote a letter of recommendation for him that took her 3 different tries to get just right, trying to put into words not just how smart he was, but how tough he was, how determined, and how he had changed from a boy full of anger into a young man with a clear purpose. In February, the town council got together to talk about the school's future. Eleanor went to the meeting feeling nervous deep in her stomach, even though Sarah told her it was just a formality. The council met in the back room of the general store again, and Margaret got the meeting started with her usual no-nonsense attitude. "We are here to go over the school's first term and make a decision on its funding going forward," Margaret said. "Mrs. Hayes, would you like to give us your report?" Eleanor stood up and laid out all the information she had carefully prepared. How many students she had, their test results, and examples of their schoolwork. She told them all about James and his chance at an apprenticeship, about how far Anna had come with her reading, and about how the older children were starting to help teach the younger ones. She explained her plans for the spring and what she hoped to accomplish in the year to come. When she was done, Wilson leaned way back in his chair and just shook his head. "I have got to admit it, Mrs. Hayes. I did not think you would last this long. I figured you would run right back to the city at the first sign of trouble. I know you did. I heard you tell Dutch you were giving me 6 weeks at the most." Wilson actually had the decency to look a little ashamed. "Well, I was wrong about that. You have done more in 6 months than I ever thought was possible. The real question is whether we can afford to keep you on." Eleanor felt her stomach drop to the floor. "I thought the funding was all settled." It was, for this first year, but we are a small town, and $30 a month plus keeping up the schoolhouse is a real strain. He looked over at the other council members. "We need to decide if having a school is worth the cost." "Of course it is worth the cost," Margaret said, her voice sharp. "Wilson, you have seen for yourself what Eleanor has accomplished. Are you honestly suggesting we just shut the whole school down? I am suggesting we need to be realistic about what we can keep up for the long haul." Dutch spoke up then. "What if we cut the pay down, $25 instead of 30? Eleanor felt the safe little world she had built starting to fall apart. She needed that full salary to stay on her own 2 feet, to save up for a rainy day, to have any kind of future. $5 a month was the difference between feeling secure and worrying all the time. Or... Caleb's voice cut right through the argument. Eleanor turned and saw him standing there in the doorway, holding his hat in his hands. She had no idea he was even there. Or we could find some other ways to get funding, instead of cutting the pay we already promised. "And just where do you suppose we would find that extra funding?" Wilson asked, sounding doubtful. "The territorial government has education grants. I looked into it. We would have to fill out an application, show them proof of our student numbers and their progress, but with the results Eleanor has, we would qualify. We could get as much as $50 a month if we get approved." Margaret's eyes lit up. "Well, why did no one say anything about this before?" "Because I just found out about it myself last week. I went to Tucson, had a talk with the folks at the Territorial Education Office." Caleb looked straight at Eleanor. "I thought it might be something worth looking into." Eleanor felt a warmth spread all through her chest. He had gone and done this for her, for the school, without saying a single word. "How much trouble is the application?" "It needs records, letters of support, and samples of the students' work, but it is nothing we could not put together if we all work on it." The council talked it over for another hour, and in the end they decided to keep Eleanor's pay right where it was while they went after the grant. Eleanor agreed to get the application ready with Caleb's help, and the meeting ended with everyone feeling a whole lot better than when it had started. Outside, Eleanor hurried to catch up with Caleb as he was getting his horse situated. "You rode all the way to Tucson and didn't breathe a word to me? I didn't want you getting your hopes up in case it all came to nothing." "It is not nothing, it is—" She had to stop. The feeling was just too big for words. "Thank you for even thinking of it, for seeing it through, for caring enough to even try." Caleb's hand covered hers and gave it a quick squeeze. "This town needs you, Eleanor, and I need you. That's all the reason I need." They spent the next month working on that grant application, pulling together all the paperwork and letters of support. Eleanor was just floored by the letters that poured in from parents. They were so honest and well-written, talking about changes in their children she hadn't even really seen herself. One mama wrote that her daughter, who had clammed up and hidden in her shell after her father died, had started talking again right after Eleanor handed her a book about a girl who lost her own family but found a new place to belong. Another daddy told them how his son was headed straight for trouble and a life of small-time crime, but now he was saving up his money to buy his own books. "Did you have any idea you were doing all this?" Caleb asked her one evening while they were stacking the letters. "Doing what?" changing folks' lives, building up their futures. Eleanor stared at the mountain of paper, at all the proof of a difference she never set out to make but had somehow managed to create. All I was doing was teaching, just coming here each day and doing my job. Well, that's what it looks like when you change a life. Just showing up and doing the job. He gave her a smile. You're going to get this grant, Eleanor, and you'll keep on doing this for years to come. One day you'll look back and see you built something that's going to outlast every last one of us. Come March, James made the trip to Tucson for his interview. Eleanor made sure he had a new shirt that Sarah had sewn, along with every last bit of encouragement she could muster. He came back 3 days later holding a letter of acceptance with tears just rolling down his cheeks. They want me, he said, his voice all choked up. They told me I'm one of the most promising fellas they've ever talked to. I start in September. Eleanor threw her arms around him in a hug. To heck with what was proper. I am so very proud of you. Your mother would be so proud, too. She is. She broke down crying when I told her the news. She said my father would have been mighty happy. James stepped back, wiping at his eyes. Mrs. Hayes, I wouldn't be here without you. You've got to know that, don't you? You would have found your own way. You're too smart and too stubborn not to. Maybe, but you made it happen a whole lot sooner. You gave me a reason to hope when I didn't have any left. He took a deep, shaky breath. Thank you for every little thing. That very afternoon, Eleanor stood right at the front of her classroom and told all the other students that James had been accepted. The whole room just exploded with cheers. Even the littlest children knew they were seeing something special, one of their own doing something truly great. This right here is what school is for, Eleanor told them once things quieted down. It opens up new doors. It gives you chances. It can take you to places you never dreamed you could ever go. James put in the hard work for this, and he earned it. But every single one of you has that same power inside you. Every one of you can build a life worth living if you're willing to put in the effort. Anna's little hand shot up. Will you help us the way you helped James? Eleanor felt a prickle in her eyes. Every single day, Anna, for as long as you'll have me. The notice that the grant was approved arrived in April. It came with a letter from the territorial governor himself, praising Cottonwood Springs for being so dedicated to schooling. The money was backdated to January, which meant Eleanor got a single payment that was more cash than she'd ever held in her life. You ought to save it, Sarah told her. Put it away somewhere safe for a rainy day. But Eleanor had different plans. She used a piece of it to buy brand new textbooks and supplies for the school. She used another part to start up a lending library that any family in the whole territory could use. The rest of it she did put away, but not for a rainy day. She was saving it for what came next. She was finally ready to build. That night, she and Caleb sat together by the creek while the sun went down. They watched the water tumble over rocks that had been made smooth by nothing but time and persistence. It has been nearly a year, Eleanor said softly, since Thomas died. Caleb stayed quiet, just giving her the space to talk. I have been thinking a lot about what's next. Not only for the school, but she took a pause, working up her nerve. For everything, for us. And what is it you want to come next? Eleanor turned so she was facing him straight on. I want to be done with waiting. I want to just say that I am ready for this, for you, and for whatever it is we might build with each other. I want her voice caught in her throat. I want to choose you, Caleb, not because I am lonely or lost or trying to fill the hole that was left, but because you are a good and decent and patient man, and you see me for who I really am, and you still want me. Caleb's hand came up and cupped her cheek, a touch that felt so right and familiar now. Eleanor Hayes, I would have waited another whole year if that is what you needed. But if you are telling me you are ready, then I am ready too. Then yes, yes to every bit of it. Yes to building something together. And yes to you. He kissed her right then, a kiss that was both gentle and sure. And Eleanor felt a part of her that she thought had died long ago flicker back to life inside her chest. This was not the clinging, desperate love she had with Thomas. where she was always trying to save him from his own demons. This felt steady and deep, built up on kindness for each other and a trust that was hard-earned. This was picking a partner instead of a project. This was building a real future instead of running after a dream. This was like coming home. Word that they were courting spread through Cottonwood Springs quicker than Eleanor would have guessed, though she figured in a town this small, keeping a secret was more of a wish than a reality. Some families gave them warm congratulations. Others were a bit more quiet, their eyes trying to figure out if it was proper for a widow to remarry before a full year had gone by. Eleanor just held her head up high and reminded herself that she had stopped worrying about what other people thought the day she decided to stay put in this territory. Margaret Cole was the first one to say something to her face. She showed up at the schoolhouse one afternoon after all the children had gone home, her wagon filled with supplies for her ranch. Eleanor was wiping the chalkboard clean when Margaret's shadow fell across the doorway. "Mrs. Hayes, you have a minute?" Eleanor put the eraser down and turned around. "Of course. Are the children doing all right?" "The children are just fine. I am here to talk about you and Caleb Morgan." Margaret's face gave nothing away. "People are starting to talk. I figured they would be. Are you going to let that trouble you?" Eleanor looked right at her without flinching. "Number one, I have wasted too much of my life being worried about what other people think. I am finished with all of that." A rare smile broke across Margaret's stern face. "Good. Because I did not build the largest cattle operation in this territory by worrying if folks liked my decisions. You and Caleb are a good match for each other. Anyone who has eyes can see it, and if someone has a problem with that, they can come talk to me." After Margaret was gone, Eleanor stood alone in the quiet schoolhouse and felt a kind of peace settle deep inside her. It was a feeling of finality, of being sure. She had been worried that choosing Caleb would mean giving up her independence, losing her identity as a woman who stood on her own. But Margaret's words were a reminder that she could be Eleanor Hayes, the teacher, and also be Eleanor Hayes, the woman who loved Caleb Morgan. The two things did not have to cancel each other out. That night, she and Caleb spoke about the future in real, solid terms for the very first time. They sat at her kitchen table long after Sarah had gone to sleep. Their coffee grew cold as they carefully talked through what a life together would look like. "I want to continue teaching," Eleanor said. "That is something I cannot compromise on. I would never ask you to quit. The school needs you and you need the school. I can see that plain as day. And I need to have my own income, my own money that belongs to me." Caleb nodded his head. "That makes perfect sense. You have had to depend on someone else before. You do not want to be in that spot again." A wave of relief washed over Eleanor. "You understand?" "I do. Eleanor, I am not trying to own you or to change who you are. I am just—" He stopped, picking his words with care. "I am asking to be a part of your life, to be your partner, not your keeper. There is a big difference. There is, and I am still trying to learn how to believe in that difference." She reached her hand across the table and took his. "But I want to try with you." They made a plan to wait until June to get married, a whole year and 1 month after Thomas had passed away. It was enough time to be proper, but not so long that they were putting off their own happiness just for the sake of how things looked. Sarah offered to help them plan a small wedding, and Eleanor realized she was truly excited about it, not filled with the sense of duty she had felt before she married Thomas. The spring school term went on with a new kind of energy. James was getting ready to leave for California in September, but he had agreed to help Eleanor train the person taking his place. It was a quiet girl named Rebecca, who had a real talent for mathematics and had said she might want to be a teacher one day herself. The younger students were making wonderful progress, and Eleanor had even started a small reading club for the older students that met twice a week after their normal lessons. In May, a photographer who traveled from town to town came through Cottonwood Springs and offered to take pictures for a fair price. Eleanor had him take a photograph of the entire school, all 28 students, standing in 3 rows in front of the schoolhouse. James stood in the back row, looking tall and serious. Anna sat with a book on her lap, so proud that she could read it. Thomas gave the camera a big grin, showing the gap in his teeth. Eleanor had a copy made just for herself and hung it up in the schoolhouse, a reminder of everything they had managed to build in less than a year. Sometimes she would find herself just looking at it, amazed at how much her life had changed since that first frightening day of school. One evening in late May, Eleanor finally took out the fake land deed that Thomas had bought. She had kept it in her trunk for all these months, not knowing what she should do with it. Now she laid it out on the kitchen table and read through all the well-written lies, the official-looking seal that was worthless, the promise of a future that was never real. "What are you going to do with that?" Sarah asked, taking a seat across from her. "I just do not know. It feels wrong to just get rid of it. It cost us everything we had, even though it is not worth a thing. It is not worthless," Caleb said from the doorway. Eleanor had not heard him walk in. "It brought you here." Eleanor looked up at him, at the quiet confidence in his face. "That is a very kind way of looking at it. It is the truth. If Thomas had not bought that piece of land, you never would have come to Arizona. You would not have found your way to Cottonwood Springs. You would not be teaching those children," or he paused, "or be here with us. So you are saying I ought to be thankful to a con man. I am saying that sometimes bad things can lead to good places. Not because the bad things were good, but because you built something good from the mess." Caleb walked over and stood behind her chair, placing his hand gently on her shoulder. "That piece of paper shows Thomas's mistake, but it also shows your bravery for coming out here despite it all, your strength in staying here, and your choice to build a new life instead of just giving up." Eleanor looked down at the paper, at Thomas's name signed next to hers. She looked at the date from just over a year ago, when they both still thought this would be what saved them. She thought about the woman she was back then, so desperate and dependent, so scared of a future by herself. And then she thought about the woman she was now, independent, with a purpose and loved, but not owned by anyone. "I am going to keep it," she said at last, "not to remember what we lost, but to remember what I found." Does that make any sense? "It makes perfect sense," Sarah said in a soft voice. Eleanor folded the deed up carefully and placed it back in her trunk. But this time it did not feel heavy with sadness and anger like it had for so long. Now, it was just paper. The hold it once had on her was finally gone. The week before the wedding, Eleanor went to Tucson with Sarah to buy fabric to make a dress. She had thought about just wearing the blue cotton dress she always wore for teaching, but Sarah was firm that she deserved something new, something she picked out special for the start of this new part of her life. They found a pale green muslin that made Eleanor think of new spring grass. It was simple, but it was beautiful. A dressmaker in Tucson took Eleanor's measurements and promised the dress would be ready in 4 days. While they were waiting, Sarah took Eleanor to a little restaurant where they ate food that Eleanor did not have to cook herself, and they talked about anything and everything except the wedding. "Are you nervous?" Sarah finally asked, as they were having coffee and pie. "Scared to death," Eleanor admitted. "Not of Caleb, but of everything else. What if I am making another mistake? What if I am just falling into the same old habit with a different man?" "You are not." Sarah's voice was steady and sure. "Thomas needed you to come and save him. Caleb just wants to be with you. Those are two completely different things. How can you be so sure?" "Because I have watched my brother for 5 years turn down every woman who showed him any interest because he knew he was not ready. He knew they wanted something from him that he was not able to give. He has been waiting for someone who could stand on her own 2 feet, who did not need him, but chose him anyway." Sarah reached over and gave Eleanor's hand a squeeze. "That is you, Eleanor. That is you. You are exactly who he has been waiting for." Eleanor felt her eyes start to water. "What if I let him down?" "Then you will figure it out together. That is what being partners is all about." Sarah smiled. "Besides, you have already made it through the worst year of your life. Compared to that, everything else is going to feel like a walk in the park." When they got back to Cottonwood Springs with the finished dress, Eleanor discovered that Caleb had been keeping busy. He had built a small addition onto the ranch house, 2 rooms that were connected to the main house but had their own door. One room was set up as a bedroom, simple but comfortable. The other room was empty except for a desk, a chair, and shelves built along one wall. "This is your study," Caleb explained when he showed it to her. "I figured you would need a place to work on your lesson plans, grade papers, and just have a space that is all yours. Sarah and I will respect that. We will not come in here unless you invite us." Eleanor walked around the empty room, running her fingers over the smooth wood of the desk. Her very own space, her own private place, where she could be Eleanor the teacher, Eleanor the person, not just Eleanor the wife. "Thank you," she whispered. It is perfect. Are you sure? If you want to change anything at all, it is perfect, just the way it is." It is. The wedding was held on a Saturday afternoon in the first part of June, right there in the schoolhouse Eleanor had fought to build. The town council had been firm about having it there instead of at the ranch. They said it was only right that the building, which stood for Eleanor's promise to the town, should also be the place where she made her promise to Caleb. Margaret spruced up the schoolhouse with wildflowers and long white ribbons. The school desks were all pushed against the walls to make an aisle. It felt like nearly every family from Cottonwood Springs was there, along with folks from neighboring towns that Eleanor had never even laid eyes on. It seemed like half the territory wanted to see this new beginning for themselves. That morning, Eleanor stood in Sarah's bedroom, looking at her own reflection in the mirror while Sarah put the last few pins in her hair. The green dress she wore fit her just right, plain and beautiful. She did not have a veil or any fancy jewelry, nothing that made it look like she was trying to be someone she was not. She was just herself, walking into this next chapter with her eyes wide open and her heart ready. "You ready?" Sarah asked. Eleanor took a long breath. She thought about everything that had brought her to this day, the lies that carried her west, the heartbreak that changed her, the town that took her in, and the man who loved her without ever trying to fix her. "I am ready." Old Man Dutch walked her down the aisle. It was her choice since she did not have a father or brother to do it, and Dutch had sort of become like a father to her over the last year. His hand felt steady on her arm, and when he put her hand into Caleb's at the front of the room, he leaned in and whispered, "Y'all are doing right by each other. That is all a person can ask for." The service itself was short and sweet. Wilson, who had gone and gotten himself ordained through a program in a catalog just so he could marry folks in the territory, led them through the traditional vows. Eleanor and Caleb had changed them up a bit to talk more about being partners and treating each other with respect, instead of using the older words about a husband and wife's duties. When Wilson finally said they were married, Caleb gave her a soft kiss, and the whole schoolhouse just broke out in cheers and applause. Toasts were made, and Eleanor heard herself laugh, a genuine joy welling up inside her that she thought she had lost for good. The party that followed carried on long after sundown. Folks set out tables that were groaning under the weight of more food than Eleanor had seen in one place since she first came to the territory. One fella brought out a fiddle, another his guitar, and pretty soon the whole town was dancing on the hard-packed dirt in front of the schoolhouse. Kids were running every which way in the fading light, while their parents ate and visited and just enjoyed the moment. Eleanor took a turn on the dance floor with Caleb, with Dutch, and even with James, who looked a little shy but gave it his all. She even danced with little Anna, who planted her tiny feet right on top of Eleanor's, and giggled the whole time. Between songs, people came up to offer their good wishes, and she could feel the community wrapping its arms around her like a warm shawl. As the sun finally disappeared and the crowd started to thin out, Margaret motioned Eleanor over. "I've got something for you." She passed her a folded sheet of paper. "It's the deed to 10 acres of land next to Caleb's place. The council voted to give it to you. And just you, mind. It's for your first year of teaching, and to show you we want you to put down roots here." Eleanor just stared at the document, at her name written all by itself on the line for the owner. "I do not understand the salary. The salary is for the work you do. This here is for your future, for your own security." Margaret's face was serious, but her eyes were kind. We heard what happened with your husband's land, Eleanor. We know you showed up here with nothing and made this all happen on your own. This is to make sure you always have something that is yours and yours alone, something no man can ever take from you. A lump formed in Eleanor's throat. She tried to say something, but the words would not come out. Instead, she just pulled Margaret into a tight hug that made the older woman chuckle and pat her on the back. All right now, all right. Do not get all weepy on me. It is just a piece of land. It is not just land, Eleanor finally whispered. It is freedom. It is proof that this is my home. Of course, this is your home. It always has been. Later that night, after everyone had gone on home and the schoolhouse stood quiet, Eleanor and Caleb walked back to the ranch side by side under a brilliant canopy of stars. Sarah had cleverly announced she would be staying the night with the Kirklands, giving the newlyweds some peace for their first night as husband and wife. They did not say much on the walk, just enjoying the comfortable quiet between them. When they got to the house, Caleb stopped just before opening the door. I meant every word I said in my vows, he told her softly, about honoring your independence, your work, and your choices. I need you to know those were not just words for a ceremony. I meant it with all my heart. I know you did, she said, and I meant what I said too, about choosing to be partners, about building a life together. Eleanor reached for his hand. I am not scared anymore, Caleb. For the first time in so many years, maybe my whole life, I am not scared of what tomorrow will bring. Their first few months of marriage fell into a rhythm that would carry them through the next several years. Eleanor kept on teaching, kept her own money, and kept her study as her own private space. Caleb managed the ranch, slowly growing their herd. His steady, quiet work brought them a kind of prosperity that neither one of them had ever really expected. Sarah stayed on with them, running the house with a cheerful hand and every now and then reminding them that she was there first and was not about to be shoved aside just because they got married. The school just kept on growing. By Eleanor's second year, the number of students had climbed to 35, and the town council was already talking about putting up a bigger schoolhouse. That September, James left for California with a few tears and a lot of promises to write. And he was good on his word, sending letters that told of his apprenticeship, his learning, and his growing belief in himself. Rebecca, who had stepped into James's spot as Eleanor's helper, turned out to be a born teacher. By Eleanor's third year at the school, she was training the girl herself, getting her ready to one day take over, if Eleanor ever chose to step down. You are building something. That right there will outlast you, Caleb remarked one evening as he watched Eleanor mapping out her lessons. A legacy. All I am doing is teaching children. But you are making teachers who will go on to teach more children, and they will make more teachers after them. That is how real change happens bit by bit through folks like you who just show up day after day and do the work. Eleanor held on to that thought in the years that came after. She thought about legacy and the mark you leave and the quiet ways a life could turn right around without any big drama or grand pronouncements. It was just about being steady, about showing up, about caring enough to keep trying. In their third year of being married, Eleanor found out she was expecting. The news filled her with a mix of pure joy and sheer terror. She had never been certain she wanted children, and the timing felt all wrong with the school year just getting started. But when she told Caleb, his face lit up with such genuine happiness that her own worries seemed to shrink a little. We will figure it out, he told her, his hand resting gently on her stomach, which was still flat. Whatever you need, whatever is best for you and the school, we will make it happen. And they did figure it out. Sarah promised to take over the teaching for the last 2 months of the school year after the baby was born, and Rebecca stepped right up to handle more of the day-to-day lessons. The town council took a vote, and every single one of them agreed to hold Eleanor's position and keep her salary coming while she was away. Their little girl was born in late March, right in the middle of a spring gully washer, coming into the world fast and loud like she was already in a hurry. At Eleanor's insistence, they named her Catherine, after the woman Caleb had loved and lost. It just felt right, honoring the past while they were building this new future. Catherine grew into a strong-willed, opinionated little girl who could read by 4 o'clock and was already trailing Eleanor to school by the time she was 5. She would sit quietly in the back of the room, soaking it all in. And Eleanor knew for sure that her daughter would either become a teacher or something that required even more grit. The years went by the way they do when you are building something that truly matters, both too fast and too slow. Each day seemed to melt into the next, but every milestone stood out sharp and clear in her memory. James sent a letter saying he had finished his apprenticeship and was hired by a mining company to draw up plans for safer ways to get ore out of the ground. Anna left for normal school down in Tucson and came right back to teach at the new school the town had to build when Eleanor's first little schoolhouse got too crowded. Thomas became a surveyor, using the math Eleanor had drilled into him to map out the whole territory. Eleanor turned 30, then 35, then 40, watching her students grow up and have children of their own who then came to sit in her classroom. Some years were leaner than others. There were droughts and heartaches and disagreements that put the whole community to the test. But through everything, the school stood firm, a beacon of what Cottonwood Springs was striving to be. One afternoon, in her 15th year of teaching, Eleanor stood before a classroom that now held 50 students in a building 3 times the size of the one she started in. She looked out at their faces, some eager, some looking bored, some struggling but still trying their best. And she felt the comfortable weight of all those years settle on her like a warm blanket. "Mrs. Morgan," one of the younger ones called out, "is it true you used to live in a big city?" Eleanor smiled. It had been such a long time since anyone had called her Mrs. Hayes that she sometimes forgot that woman had ever been her. "I did, yes, a long, long time ago. Why did you come all the way out here?" It was a question Eleanor had been asked more times than she could count over the years, and her answer had changed with time. In the beginning, she would say it was on account of her husband's land, which was true, but not the whole truth. Later, she would say it was for the teaching job, which was also true, but still not the complete story. Now, with the wisdom of years and the clarity that came from making a life she was proud of, Eleanor gave the truest answer she knew. "I came here because I was lost and searching for a home, and I stayed because I found one." That evening, Eleanor sat on the porch of the house that had grown and changed right along with them over the years to make room for their life. Inside, Catherine was working on her lessons, arguing with Sarah about a math problem. Caleb sat next to Eleanor, his hand holding hers, as they watched the sun dip below the horizon of the land they had worked and loved and built a future on. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked, his voice low. "Staying here instead of heading back east, instead of finding some place where life was easier?" Eleanor considered the question with care because Caleb deserved a straight answer. She thought about the woman who had first set foot in the Arizona territory 15 years ago. A woman who was desperate, grieving, and clutching a fake deed and a heart full of fear. She thought about everything that woman had lost and everything she had since found. "No," she said at last, "I do not regret a single day, not even the hard ones. Especially not the hard ones because they showed me who I could be. And who is that?" Eleanor smiled. "Someone who picks her own trail. Someone who builds things instead of just getting by. Someone who is a whole lot stronger than she ever thought possible." She gave his hand a squeeze. "Someone who is home." Years later, long after Eleanor had retired from teaching and Rebecca had taken her place as the head instructor, the town held a ceremony to name the school in Eleanor's honor. She stood in front of a building that now had her name on it, the Eleanor Hayes Morgan School, and looked out at the crowd that had gathered. There were former students, now grown with kids of their own, and town council members, some she remembered from the beginning and some who were new. Sarah was there, her hair turned to silver but her eyes still sharp as ever, and Caleb, her rock, stood right beside her. They asked her to say a few words, and Eleanor walked to the podium, feeling the immense weight of the years, of her gratitude, and a deep, quiet satisfaction. "When I first came to Cottonwood Springs," she started, "I truly believed my life was over. I had lost my husband, my home, and any sense of purpose. I came out here chasing a dream that ended up being a lie, and I thought that meant I had failed at everything that ever mattered." She paused, looking at all the faces watching her. These were people who knew parts of her story, but maybe not the whole thing. But this community taught me something I had forgotten. That dreams do not have to be perfect to be worth chasing. That sometimes the best futures are built right out of the wreckage of your broken plans. That home is not a place you just find. It is a choice you make every single day to show up and do the work and put your heart into something bigger than yourself. Eleanor smiled, feeling tears on her cheeks and not minding one bit. This school, this town, all of y'all. You gave me that home. You gave me a purpose when I was sure I had none left. You gave me a future when I thought mine was already in the past. And for my part, all I did was show up. All I did was teach your children and love this place and choose every single day to stay. She looked at Caleb, at the life they had built together through patience and partnership and a deep respect for each other. I came here lost. I stayed because I was found. And I will be grateful for that every day for the rest of my life. The applause was like thunder, but Eleanor hardly heard it. Her gaze was fixed on the schoolhouse, on the children who would learn inside it for generations to come, on the legacy of just being steady and caring, of choosing to stay even when it would have been much easier to leave. Somewhere, tucked away in a trunk at her house, a fraudulent deed was gathering dust. A worthless piece of paper that had cost her everything and given her nothing, except for a journey that changed her entire life. Eleanor had never sold it, never even thrown it away. She kept it as a reminder that sometimes your worst mistakes can lead you to your best endings. Not because the mistakes themselves were good, but because of what you decide to build from their ashes. She had come to Arizona chasing a dream that was not even real. Instead, she had found something so much better. A home she had chosen, a purpose she had claimed, a love she had built on trust instead of fear, and a legacy that would last long after they were all gone. It was more than enough. It was everything. And standing there in the Arizona sun, surrounded by the community she had helped build, and the family she had made, and the future she had made possible, Eleanor Hayes Morgan knew with all her heart that she was exactly where she belonged, home.